Hello, everybody. Welcome to Into the Story, episode 7. Today we have a very special guest, Shwei. What's up, Shwei?
Hi. Hey, how's it going, Mohammed?
Good, good. Why don't you introduce yourself for the folks at home?
Sure. All right. I'm Tyson Lind, but on Twitch they call me Shwei, and I am at twitch.tv/Shwei. That's SHWEI. I was in the qualifiers for the first tournament, and I placed right middle of the pack in that particular one. I've been top of the leaderboard for pretty much every season so far, and that means like top 25, sometimes higher than that. And before that, I was in the top 200 of Hearthstone Battlegrounds pretty much every month for like the last year or so. So I've got, and before that, even I was a queen in Dota Auto Chess. So got quite a bit of experience in this space. Excited to be here.
I was Rook. I didn't quite
Nice. I mean, that's almost there.
That's almost there. Yeah, I was Rook. Anyway, we also have two other folks. We have Keith, OTR, and Kleck. Say hello, friends.
Hello.
Cool. So let's get into it. I mean, you've been playing Storybook Brawl for a while.
Since about 2 weeks after it came out.
How'd you get into it?
A few of the people that I like to watch on Twitch decided to try this game out. There was Yuckmouth, who actually used to be a viewer of mine when I was streaming Hearthstone Battlegrounds. Then he stuck with the streaming for a really long time, was really consistent with it, decided to give this game a try. And also Endozoa, who I had known for quite a while playing Hearthstone Battlegrounds. They both decided to give this game a try. I watched them play it for a little while. I said, what the heck? The artwork initially didn't appeal to me, but I was like, the mechanics look interesting. Let's give it a shot. And after playing the game for a day, I have almost not touched Hearthstone Battlegrounds again. Nothing against that game. It's another great game. But man, this game just really like satiated or like basically satisfied a bunch of things that I was really looking for in an auto battler, and have been super, super stoked to continue to play it.
Cool. We have a lot of different folks from different backgrounds. I mean, you did auto chess and Hearthstone Battlegrounds and pretty much other auto battlers. And this has been such a varied game with obviously different mechanics, because people think when they first look at this game, they're like, oh, it's Hearthstone Battlegrounds, but it has like one mechanic different or something like that, which sort of untrue, especially with positioning.
There's a bit more to it than that, like you're saying with positioning. Some of the mechanics in the game, like flying, doesn't exist in Hearthstone Battlegrounds, which is an interesting addition. You don't really have anything like Cupid, a card that can be used to counter builds that are much bigger than yours. Yep. So there's a lot of very interesting things in this game. Medusa, for example, like you don't really have scam quite like they have it in this game, and just the combination of the positioning and the treasures and everything, it makes the game feel a lot more complex and dynamic in terms of how you have to respond to different opponents.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's kind of an obligatory question that we've asked a bunch of people that have come on.
Okay.
What is your current favorite hero?
To be honest, the hero that I am the most comfortable playing, and I'm not saying this is the best hero, but the most comfortable hero for me is actually Skip, believe it or not.
Yeah, I've heard that quite a bit. Kleck has a comfort spot for Skip. I
liked him more in the past than I do now, but I do like him. He's quite favorable for me.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable playing him, at least. A couple turns behind, and then eventually stabilize, and you're good to go. Kleck had mentioned the meta. Essentially, I'm guessing that's more or less what you're alluding to with picking him now versus like picking him in the past.
Wait, I have a question for you. When I think about Skip, like I think of him as like more of a mid-range, safer hero with like a little bit less upside potential than others. Like obviously he has his downside. How do you think about Skip as a hero?
The way I think about Skip is that you're coming into a gunfight without any knives, but every single turn you are getting offered a better weapon than everyone else.
Yeah.
And so slowly over time, you're building up an arsenal that people can't compete with. And I think one of the mistakes people make, and I'm calling it a mistake only because I've had very good results with this particular way of looking at the hero. And I'm not saying that my way is absolute or anything, but this has been working for me, is I don't try to be gold efficient. I just try to make sure that I buy the best, at least one good unit every turn if possible. Unless it's a mega low roll game, I'm just trying to buy one good unit. So that means on 5 gold, instead of trying to buy a 2 and a 3, I'm trying to buy a 4. My first turn getting to 5, instead of buying like a 4 drop and like another 4 drop, I'm buying a 5 and then maybe picking up a 2 or like a spell or something like that. Because I think that quality over quantity is like, at least for me, it's had tremendous success.
Yeah, I mean, when you hit 4 and when you're hitting like broccoli and the majority of people are assembling boards of like small little token creatures and stuff, it's kind of dope. You know, you
it
literally
trades like 3 for 1 or 4 for 1.
Yeah, it's like 4 for 1. And Godmother, obviously, we don't really need to explain, I guess, that much about how good she is when you get her on 4, but it's pretty good. I mean, you've been here since the inception of the game, and you've seen drastic changes, at least through the entire meta, right?
There's been quite a few shifts.
And the most recent thing that has happened in current news is a patch. So let's dig a little bit into that. What did you think of it?
Sounds good. I thought they were some very, very well planned out. And even the ones that didn't benefit me, which I'm a little bit hurt about Roundtable going to 7. That's been affecting my win rate a little bit. And it's something I'm still having to learn to adjust to. I still think after seeing the change, wow, I was like, dang, that was such a smart move. Because it's made so many other comps come back into the meta, and you're seeing like a variety of different builds win. And that makes me really happy, because I think a good game is when you feel like there's 5 or 6 different ways you can win and not that you have to force every. I think that's super.
Yeah. But like the problem, Shwei, is that like I can't just donkey roll for 6s and get Roundtable. Like that's not fair.
I was gonna say, well, Shwei beat me to the punch there, because that was actually a pretty big thing I was going to talk about as well. Is the game feels a lot more playable currently, and a massive reason for that is Roundtable being nerfed a bit. You're seeing all these other comps come out and people winning with them. Great.
Yeah, it feels like, honestly, with the Roundtable change as well as the other change to Arthur that we'll get into, like, feels like Storybook Brawl again. Like the game last patch, like it did not feel like the same game to me. I wasn't enjoying it, and it feels like a game that I can enjoy playing, as opposed to just purely trying to raise my rank number.
Yeah, and I think that's like it's definitely different now. It's not just the race to 6. I mean, it's always been about the race to 6, but like now it just feels, I don't know how to really describe it. I'm seeing a lot less adventurer on people's boards. I'm seeing a lot more XP spell purchases. I'm seeing a lot less, I guess, weaker boards, and a lot of the time I'm running into a lot stronger boards than I was used to.
See the game being played more.
Yeah, I mean, sure, if that's the differential, then so be it. But primarily, what I'm saying is that like the game just feels a lot more different now for me, and also Roundtable Choose being gone made me really sad, because that was my crutch. If I couldn't figure out anything else, it was just like play that or play, evil. Or Good Boy, but now there's like a bunch of different builds out there, all depending. And
but also on top of that, the fact that the entire community has gotten astronomically better at the game, being able to play all these other builds and seeing people counter them and stuff is also a bit exciting as well. Like, you don't have like one comp that's super strong, i.e. roundtable, that like, oh yeah, I'm just racing for this comp. Everyone's trying different comps and
Right.
repositioning, and people know that Scam is really good against Good Boy, etc. Everyone's playing the game well, and it's not just one archetype that's just like dominating.
Yep.
Which I think is like really great for the game. Like
Absolutely.
I love seeing more of that. And I feel like with people getting better at playing like strong boards in the mid game, it speeds the game up, which actually makes more comps viable. When the game goes too long, then the game tends to like shift down to only a few comps that either have crazy scaling or have a tremendous power spike that can win the game. So like if the game went for like 10 turns, you could see like 6, 7, 8 different comps win the game. If the game went for 12, it might drop down to like 4 or 5. If the game goes for 16, now it's like only going to be like your good boys and your giant tree comps that are going to win, or maybe even like your trophy hunter type stuff. So it's like the longer the game goes, the less options you have. And I think that faster pace in the mid game is actually what's driving some of this versatility in what you can play in the end game as well, in addition to some of these changes they made in the patch.
I agree.
I also want to add on top of that, like, I agree with that, and I also agree, as we mentioned, well, we briefly mentioned, and we're going to get into about the changes with Arthur, the fact that you don't have something that you can just lean on in the early mid game and just autopilot and then just make it to the end game. Like,
You have
that
to build a
totally.
to me
board.
doesn't feel nice for an auto chess, for an auto battler.
You don't want something that someone can just plug into a board and it just automatically gives them top 4, because then you don't feel like your decisions matter, and that's not
Exactly.
fun.
Yeah, because I mean, but there are some times where you don't feel like any of the decisions that you made matter.
True, that still can happen, but and you're not going to be able to ever completely get away from that in an auto battler. It's
Sure.
just more of a question of like, do you want that to be like the case every game, that there's somebody that you face that you feel like that was the case for? Or do you want that to be like the high roll that you run into here and there?
I don't know. A lot of the games that I've been playing lately it's felt more like I've run into the high roll board a lot more often than I think I should. And I'm not saying that there wasn't something that I could have done better, because there obviously was. But a lot of the choices that I made throughout the game felt kind of nullified after playing the middle place guy who dealt like a jillion damage to me, and then having to play the first place guy who then absolutely did a jillion and a half damage to me, and then I died. So it doesn't necessarily feel great when that happens and you just get pummeled over and over again. And
Yeah,
there's probably something I'm doing wrong, and I just have to evaluate and fix it. That's all.
Sure.
for sure. To be honest, like maybe that's the case, but I also want to like give you some benefit of the doubt and say run bad can honestly go on for like weeks. You can have like weeks at a time where you just run bad, where you're not getting great boards, you're not getting great shops, you're not getting great options. And that can start to get into your head. And that's like a whole different aspect to the game that's really hard to deal with.
So
Yeah,
how do you?
I had a tough time dealing with that. The past week, I've actually had like super low roll games, and then I play today, and I just like get first place almost every game.
Yeah,
That's awesome, Cliff.
I know about running hot and running bad. I mean, played enough poker to realize that like there are just times where you're down, but
Yeah.
like you can't let it get essentially in your head of how down you are and
So-
why you are down, and then not tilting. And we've talked about this in multiple episodes, but I would like to get your take on it. Like, how do you prevent that?
So I'm going to use this as a bit of a segue as well, but just speaking on it shortly, like if I am on like a mega low roll where I'm just getting pummeled and it seems like my shops are horrible, I cannot hit triples, I cannot find treasures, I can't even find playable synergistic units to build boards, and I'm just taking it. after a few games, I will usually just take a break. It's a little bit tougher if you're streaming because you can't always do that. And sometimes you have to bite the bullet and be
Oh
like,
man,
hey, I'm just going to play
I've
through the
done
pain
that.
here.
I've done that and dropped like 300 MMR straight.
Yeah. Yeah. But like,
300. Collect. That's an understatement. Like,
All right,
man,
relax.
honestly, like, no. But like, knowing you as a friend, like, sometimes watching you when you're streaming and you have to keep playing, like, it's hard to watch because I feel so bad. Like, it's just
yeah.
there's nothing you can do, and like, oh, it's painful. I hate it. I have to turn it off sometimes. I just can't handle it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
It's.
I don't want you to watch me anyways.
Yeah, it's so brutal though. Like, but
Mm.
I believe that if you're not streaming and if you're just playing this game like either competitively or because you think it's a fun game and you like the format and the build of it, I would say just taking a break and stepping away. And even if your plan was to play like 4 or 5 games and you played two and they just went horribly and now you're in this awful headspace, go do something else for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And then if you still feel like playing, come back at it with a fresh head. And sometimes just that little break away, even if it doesn't actually change your luck, it can change your headspace so that you don't start tilting and playing worse than the shops that are offered to you just because you're in this like, oh, I can't win, the game won't let me win headspace.
Yeah. So, I mean, just as a relatable thing, I started shooting pool recently. After about 3 hours of standing on my feet, my back getting pretty bent, and I'm pretty tired afterwards. I need at least like a little bit of a break in between. And like that point, I start playing worse. So I'm just like, well, I should probably like, give myself like that physical and mental break. And
mental is huge in pool as well as the physical.
Yeah, exactly. But
aren't you like a pool champion, Click?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a state master title for Illinois.
That's
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. But essentially what I'm getting at here is that I need to check in with myself once in a while. And like do that while you're playing. Like this is my advice as well. It's just like check in, be like, do I need to take a break? Like am I just rage queuing the entire time? Like am I tired? Am I hungry? Have I not eaten anything? What do I need to do in order to be able to reset and come back this with a clear head? And I really have been like prescribing to that with everything, not just Storybook Brawl, not just pool, not just literally everything. Like what do I need?
Space in general.
It's a good life strategy. Like knowing the position that you're in and knowing like your total body state for sure.
Yeah.
One other thing I was going to say as a segue off of that is that I believe that if you have a more holistic approach to the game, that you're less likely to stay tilted as long. And my reason for saying that is that if you think that the game is just like, oh, you always do this, you always do this, you always do this, then when you look at your game and you're like, well, I did all the things and I didn't win and I can't win and it just seems like I can't win again and again, I think that's more likely to put you in a negative headspace than if you have a more like in-depth fundamental understanding of the game and you look at your decisions and you say, well, I made the best decisions I could make. I took these risks. I took these calculated advantage potentials and it didn't work out. And I feel like you can like make peace with it, let go of it and move forward without it continuing to like grate at your mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like I think in the Arthur meta, for example, if you were to sit there and say like, well, I didn't find Arthur on 3. Guess I lose. And every game you didn't find Arthur, you just said to yourself, okay, well, I either get Arthur or I get 8th. And that's just how this meta is. That would be like pretty wrong, even if you said that Arthur was the best card or that Arthur comps always won, which actually wasn't true either. But there was so many other things you could do from a counterplay perspective to not force Arthur. And even higher level players like Infinite Way were finding that entirely avoiding Arthur was actually the better strategy because then they had access to all the other units that weren't royals, and they had their comps were less contested.
Less of my comps included Arthur than actually did. Arthur was only a part of my comps, like maybe, I want to say like 10 or 20% of the time.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I think, as you were saying, this might be a decent segue just in terms of trying to, look at the way that the game is approached and the way that the game is thought about. One reason that I was really interested in having you on the podcast was just to talk about kind of your philosophy on auto battlers and just kind of how you had talked about potentially writing a guide, and guides are they're a big ask, and there's very few good ones, or maybe not good ones, but there's very few complete ones that I've actually seen written in the community for good reason. But regardless, as a sneak peek, maybe you could walk me through some of the concepts that you were thinking about, and we as a podcast we can dig into some of that stuff, because I'm, like, spoiler alert, I am super ready to geek out on this stuff. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like, this is probably the topic that I am the most passionate about in auto battlers. Is whatever I do, like whatever game I've played in the past, I try to break it down to its like the smallest possible pieces and build it from that direction. I start to say, like, okay, like, what are the key concepts here that I need to be taking in, and how are they applicable to my decisions? And so I think instead of taking the approach of like what I would call a very surface level way of understanding the game is, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way, when you're getting to learn the game, but if you want to get to a deeper level, you kind of have to move past this. And so the surface level is you watch somebody play the game, you see what cards they're buying on any individual tier, and you kind of like try to mimic what they're doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great place to start from. But the next level you have to get to is you have to ask yourself, why does that make sense? Why is that stronger than other decisions that could have been made? And what are all of the other factors that go into that decision? So, like, let's say, for example, you're on tier 4 and you have the option to buy a XP spell, or you can pick up, I don't know, like, let's say, like, what would be a good unit, like a Juliet. You can buy a Juliet,
or a Medusa. Maybe Medusa's an
or maybe Medusa. Yeah. So you've got like the option of a Juliet in your shop, a Medusa in your shop, or an XP spell in your shop. You have to look into, okay, so the basic decision people would make, and I think this is where people all started out. You saw a lot of this in the very first month of this game coming out, which was XP always right answer, buy XP. And so people were just forcing XP, getting to 6, and
laughing especially hard because that's what he did.
Yeah.
Wait, what do you mean I did? What are you talking about? You're speaking like I don't still do that.
And sometimes that does work out, and it's great, but you reach a certain point where if you want to be consistent, you need to make more decisions that are more based around your exact position. What is my life total? How many people are alive left in the lobby? Who's on 5? Who's on 4? Who's on 3? Do I need this XP in order to be able to get myself into a winning position? What hero am I playing? Is my hero a hero that wants to get first place and has a good chance of getting it? Or is my hero a hero that doesn't necessarily need to level in order to get first place? Like, let's say, for example, if you happen to have a bunch of golden royals and you had an Arthur, you may go for a slower strategy where you're scaling all the way up and you may not get the XP. Maybe what you really want is the Juliet. Maybe what you really want is the Medusa. And it's really like you have to look at all of the individual factors and say, what are my treasures? Because if you don't have any treasures, that makes a huge difference on the decisions you make compared to other people that have 3 treasures. You're probably not going to want to play super aggressively because you'll just get 8th place.
I want to add also too, all of those points are correct, but I want to reiterate, further reinforce. This is something that isn't often talked about. Sometimes you're in a position where, let's say, you have really bad opening shops. You're against opponents that had really good shops, favored their heroes, or they're getting massive value out of their hero power, whatever. You are under 20 HP within the first few turns. you're in a position where you're probably getting 8th, but now you need to reevaluate and say, hey, I'm probably getting 8th, but I can probably stretch this out to a 6th or a 5th and kind of hedge my losses here. And you need to understand when you're in that position and what to do from that position as well. On top of all the other things Shwei mentioned.
100%. Yeah, could not agree more with Kleck. Like, and those spots, especially at higher MMR, is the difference between getting like a whole extra first place, which is the crazy part.
Yeah, and like, that's, we were discussing a little bit before the episode. I saw a skip today with 2 adventurers. He was sub H without buffs, and he was at like, I don't know, 18 HP. Yeah, good luck, friend. Like, I wish
Bahamut Adventure is a good card, okay? If you see it, you should buy it, right?
Yeah, totally. He obviously, or they, I shouldn't say he, they obviously took an 8th because they were playing skip. They were already behind. They were trying to power level. Didn't work out. Their board wasn't strong enough for them to stabilize. They got to 6 really fast, but they didn't have gold to buy anything, and they died. So... That's
something in this discussion. Sorry to cut you off there, Bahamut. Something this discussion reminded me of that I've been thinking about a lot lately is when I first started playing the game, I was always trying to figure out like when it was appropriate to buy XP, when it was appropriate to buy adventure, that type of stuff. And I tried to create these rules for myself where it was like, if I'm above 30, I always do it. If I'm between 20 and 30, I sometimes do it. If I'm below 20 health, I never do it. And obviously that's pretty well. It is, and it was a way for me of reducing the amount of noise and giving myself some guidelines. And it was really helpful when I was teaching other people. And so, from the same perspective that Shwei just said, there's nothing wrong with starting with this idea of, okay, you see this unit, you buy it, But then the better you get at the game, and the more nuanced your decision making gets, the more you want to consider other factors. And what I've recently realized is like using those rules for XP, like the 20 or the 30, 20, 20, but going between those brackets, that's a pretty good way to like dumb down or reduce the noise in that decision making. But all that your health does is it gives you a general idea of how strong you are. And so that's really what you should be making these decisions on, right? Or partially anyways, is on like, hey, what is my tempo on my board? How strong am I? And how many hits can I afford to take before I die?
Exactly.
And so those are the factors that you really want to be considering. And your health total is just a way for less experienced players, and rightfully so, of making that decision easier. But as you dig deeper into these concepts, then you start to be able to understand, the decision tree gets wider and wider. And Shwei did a very good job of illustrating all these different things you need to be thinking about. But ultimately, there's it starts at the top of like always buy adventure, and then the more experience you get of the game, the wider this fork gets until it's almost impossible to give any kind of specific feedback to people, so much as it is to say you need to play the game more, which isn't that helpful either. So I think it's interesting that way, right? It's like the better you get at this game, the more nuanced your feedback gets to other people, and the less helpful it can almost be in a sense. So I don't know how to package that, but it's fascinating to me.
No, you said it perfectly. I feel like that describes exactly the problem I have sometimes with answering people's questions on Twitch chat is they're looking for a specific answer, and I can't give it to them because I'm like, well, what was your health total? Who else was in the lobby? Like, I want 100 different questions to be answered before I can give them the answer that I think makes the most sense for that situation. And it's so difficult. But I think health total is probably the biggest factor when it comes to leveling. And I think it's even a bigger factor than it ever was in Hearthstone Battlegrounds. Because in Hearthstone Battlegrounds, you could make decisions about when to level based on health total, but also based on the historical damage done by your opponents and who you're about to face. And we don't have that kind of information in this game. So all we have to go on is our health total and the health total of our opponents. And we have to make assumptions about how strong each hero is going to be on any individual tier and any individual turn based on their health total and what hero they're playing and what types of comps spike at different points and whether those are the types of comps that hero wants to be playing.
Exactly.
Go
Like
ahead.
Avella, for example, right? Avella is good at the beginning of the game, the middle of the game, and then towards the end of the game, she's not as great as she once was. Primarily, and well, if you see an Avella at like, I don't know, 20 HP by like 4 or something like that, that means that, they probably low rolled their opener pretty hard. Because so you can make a decision. So if you're playing against the 20 HP Avella, right, and you just beat first place, you have a pretty good idea that you're probably going to win against the 20 HP Avella.
Right.
But then again, there's also been times where they can go ahead and randomly hit a spike. They can get that triple they were looking for, get the sarcophagus. They can get hand. They can, they can get all of these things that would change it. So you still have to treat them with respect. But like, I don't know, when I'm facing a skip that's level 5 and I'm like level, I don't know, 4. And I have to be cognizant that, there's probably a mummy on this board, and I'm most likely going to lose this fight if I can't recover from my entire board getting blown out by a mummy. And
most of the time, I assume that they don't have the mummy, but when they do, you feel really bad.
Yeah, see, I'm quite the opposite. It's always there until it's not. So,
well, I think there is such a thing as playing too cautiously. Sometimes you miss out on opportunities by trying to play too hard around a particular thing. You have to say, these are my outs that I want to play against. It's very much like poker in that way. It's like, what hands you can beat, what hands you can't beat, and you don't like pretend that your hand is something different than what it is.
Exactly.
Like, you just play the hand that you're given and you say, okay, well, 60% of the time I'm supposed to win that pot. I'm all in. Here we go.
And then, you get flopped out by a pretty nasty flush that you didn't see coming.
But there's also this idea of acceptable losses, right? Where if, say, we go back to the example of Avella, because I think she's a very good example. When you play against that player, you're typically not expecting them to have too many triples, and you're expecting them to be extremely strong. And like the higher their health total is, the stronger they probably are. But at some point you say, okay, well, I'm actually never going to win this fight. So rather than trying to tempo, maybe I'll just grab that XP spell anyways. I might as well level this turn. You know what I mean? Or I might as well throw in that frontline adventurer to try and get that XP out of this turn. I'm going to take some damage, but if I have enough health to survive the hit, I mean, that way I'm actually getting something as opposed to just like trying to win a fight that you're never going to win anyways.
Exactly. Yeah. That's also the other part of it is like in the earlier shops, if you have a happy little tree, right? And you have, I don't know, let's say a polywoggle, right? And I don't know, something, black cats, I guess. And you're going against Jack's Giant. You're normally not going to win with that board. So you just take whatever what can ever get you the long-term value. Not saying it's impossible to beat it, but when a majority of the minions early game characters, not minions, are early game are very low health, very high attack for the most part, you are probably not going to win because it has so much more HP. Because like the units that he has are going to have a lot more HP. So as you said, acceptable losses, like understanding that I'm not going to win this fight. And I'm probably not going to win, like, and then when you face the Avella afterward, you're probably not going to win that fight either, early, depending. But, you have to, as you said, Keith, like, you have to accept some of the losses that you can take. It's just, I think that's different, though, for ladder versus tournament play of, like, what the acceptable loss would be, right?
Oh,
sure,
100%.
Sure. It's a very different perspective.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that's...
Yeah, when you're...
go ahead,
when
Shwei.
you're playing tournament, you have to swing for the fences.
Yeah. And sometimes like that low roll opportunity, and Kleck has brought it up multiple times of like when you are low rolling and sometimes your only out is too high roll, you got to go for it, right? So
well, you guys have seen me with like 5 HP and 2 golden polys on board.
Yeah.
Proccing both of them and winning the game.
Yeah, I've also watched you then transform into what is the Morgan and then absolutely win the game.
Oh yeah.
It's absurd, but it happens. That's gambling. You just got to know.
Sometimes you got to all in and hope you hit the royal flush,
Yeah.
Right. Know when to take your spots for sure. Super important. But some of the other things that I think would be really good to talk about, like not necessarily here, but what I would like to put into a guide is talking about different unit types and understanding how they play in a game. So, like, the way that I wanted to break some of those concepts down is how would I describe the first group? Would be like fallers, spikers, and scalers. And that would be a way to describe units that are immediately extremely strong the second you put them on your board, and they get weaker every single turn that they're in play. Another type of unit that starts out very weak but gets stronger throughout the course of the entire game, and you can keep playing that unit, like slay units, for example, or like familiars, things like that. And then you have linear spike units that become very like make you significantly stronger, and then it's like a kind of like a static boost, and then it like basically falls off over time. And that would be an example of like Juliet and Romeo, where you're gaining like a set amount of stats, which is really powerful on tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, maybe. And then because it's static and because it's not increasing its value without any other type of scaling to go with it, then it just kind of like falls off and fizzles.
Exactly.
But like understanding like the unit types and the unit combinations, I think would help people better understand the position that they're in and how strong they are. And that's like Keith was talking about earlier. What it really comes down to a lot of the times is being able to correctly evaluate how strong your boards are to be able to make relevant decisions to your position. And we use health as like one of the ways to determine that. But ultimately, health is, like he said, just a number. And what really matters is your board state. And your board state can change drastically, even though your health total can't really like revert back to a higher total.
Yeah. I also think, and I don't know how closely this would slot onto your concept, Shwei. I know it would be fairly close, but also when people are making decisions on what units to buy, understanding what unit roles you already have filled on your board and understanding how strong an upgrade a specific unit is and if spending that gold is worth it, right? So it's like
Right.
when you're playing Fallen Angel, like if you already have a Mad Mim, right? Okay, like a Sporko would be an upgrade to your board, right? But if you already have enough tempo, do I really need like enough? Do I need to replace that Madman with a Sporko, or can I spend that gold rolling for XP?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or if I already have a Medusa and a Cupid, okay, like an Apple Tree is like a pretty strong unit, but I already have a couple scam pieces. Is an Apple Tree really the piece that I need here? And the answer might be yes, the answer might be no, but if you just look at units in a vacuum and consider is this strong, is this weak, it's not really going to inform whether it's going to how well it's going to fit into your comp. It's just going to tell you did I buy a good unit or did I buy a bad unit. And for newer players that's important because they don't understand. They don't like I was coaching somebody the other day, and I think the most helpful thing that I did the entire coaching session was at the end they just were like, "Can you just tell me what the good units are?" And I was like, at first I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, like, but then we just went through the list of units, and I was just like on tier 3, like I don't know, like Snow White is a good unit, Evil Queen is a good unit. On 4, like Buzzard is a good unit, and Hippocamp can be a good. And then like they gave me feedback later, and they're just like, man, like I asked like what was the most helpful thing? They're like, honestly, just like understanding what the good units are was just like so key. So once you understand what the good units are, that's good. But to take your game to the next level, you want to start to understand, well, what makes those units good? Like, what roles are they filling? And like,
Right.
Anyways, I was just talking there, but I think that captures something that you were trying to discuss, right, Shwei?
Sure. Yeah, I think that can kind of like fit into that space. Is that so understanding what the units that you have on board are trying to do and how to get them to do that. So like let's say for example, you happen to pick up some familiars. Okay, now you're kind of doing some skelly things. And so it's like, okay, well, I should be maybe looking at some and to be fair, just let me like throw this like disclaimer out there first, which is don't try to force anything too hard just because you have a couple pieces. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be thinking about it as oh, that's a possible direction I should go or could go. Because this game is like a decision tree. And
Yep.
it's like every time you get a couple pieces added onto your board or added into your comp, or you bought this or you bought that, you're opening up branches, or you're making branches that you've already opened thicker.
It also happens like literally within a roll of a shop too.
Yeah, sometimes it can happen within one roll of a shop. Like, let's say you have a couple, like a vampire on your board and a couple familiars, and then you roll into double spellweaver, and it's like, oh, I could go into a familiar spellweaver comp here, or I could stick with the pieces that I have, ignore the spellweavers, and try to work with Slay in a combination with spells and other things. And you kind of have to make some of those decisions and calls about which branch you decide you're going to commit to. And sometimes half of the game or half of winning the game is committing to a branch. You say, okay, I'm going to do this branch, and it's going to either work out or it's not going to work out, but I'm going to go with it.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And it's something that I used to think a lot about with Princess White, like especially last meta. I was experimenting with her quite a bit in terms of finding out situations where I could play white with like only like a semi-dwarf comp. And what I generally found is that the higher my health total was, the more I could get away with doing like weird stuff with her. But then like as my health total got lower and I had less room to play and like fit in other pieces and transition to princess, I just had to full commit to dwarfs, right? So I do think in that case, health is actually a very relevant thing. Not because it shows you your tempo, but it just represents your margin for error. And the less margin for error you have, the less rolls that you have, the less time that you have for something to materialize, right?
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like that's one of the hardest things is like some games you just can't keep yourself from being at 20 HP before you even get to tier 4 or tier 5. And those are the most difficult games to navigate because every decision you make from there on out is mission critical to you not getting 8th place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point.
It's like figuring out how to stabilize from there. I mean, what can I do? And people,
it's not always about stabilizing. As I mentioned, it's about like what is the right decision for me.
Yeah, what is my spot and how do I capitalize on it?
Yeah, and
what's the direction I go from there.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I meant. But people, at least when I read Twitch chat and things like that, and probably you've experienced this a lot too, Shwei, is like people are looking for that one stop answer,
right?
For what can I do, like in this situation?
The answer is apple tree.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Magus must be a regular listener.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I was going to say.
No, I've followed hard for the apple tree.
If Magus was a regular listener of this podcast, he would have said apple bomb.
Yeah,
right.
True.
Exactly. True. I can't get on board with that lingo. I cut you off a bit there, Shwei, but
you're good.
Even if it wasn't worth it, I had to do it.
You're good.
I actually was doing co-ops with Magus, surprisingly. Yeah, when there was an apple tree, he wanted to buy it. And I was like, I don't think it's exactly correct here. And he was like, apple tree. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And
I do think apple tree is a really good card, but I think Magus also picks it because it's part of his brand.
Yes. True. No, I mean, I'm not saying that's not true. I mean, that's 100% true. However, like when I am actually co-oping and like trying to figure out things, sometimes it makes sense to me when he wants to pick it, and sometimes it doesn't. So, TLDR, your mileage may vary, right? That's pretty much what it all comes down to. Is your mileage may very much vary.
I wanted to key off something that Shwei mentioned earlier, and I think it was really important, is he was talking about understanding what a unit's role is and how to make sure that unit accomplishes that role. And I think with Apple Tree, it's a decent example where if you have an Apple Tree with attack, or say 2 of them in positions 3 and 4, if you don't have any summon units in front of them, it's going to be a lot harder for those Apple Trees to accomplish their goal, which is of getting attacked into, right?
Yeah.
So the less Apple Trees you have, and the more units you have in front of those apple trees, the greater the chances that they get attacked into. So one thing that you can do when you have apple trees is to put summons in front, right? I think just generally saying apple tree good is not useful if the apple tree is attacking, because then the apple tree isn't doing its job. It's not accomplishing its role.
Well, it's coming back to that, like that it's feeding a certain hunger that exists on Twitch, which is that people want like just like a concrete, solid across the board answer. And I think that works at lower MMRs. And I think that there's nothing wrong with giving that kind of advice. But I'm assuming that your podcast, if anybody's listening to this, is, and I can see there are a lot of people are because I went and checked out your channel and you guys got a lot of views. I'm assuming that these people are like people that are more interested in an in-depth conversation about getting to that next level, which is no one's telling you how to play the game. At best, they're telling you how to think about the game, and you're making your own decisions and evolving as a player by having like a good base of how you think about the game and the fundamentals of it.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to, is the majority of the topics that we cover, at least from all previous episodes, all have the kind of the same revolving theme for the most part at the moment. Especially when we start talking the high level players, when we start talking about the patch, when we start talking about, our experiences, is that your mileage 100% may vary. You can't put everything in a vacuum and say this is good, this is bad, because there are situations where something might be extremely broken due to the circumstance that you were put in, right?
Yeah.
And I can't really think of any off the top of my head at the moment, but primarily our biggest guideline to give is that take the advice and take the purchases into consideration. Know your spot in the game and understand how your position is going to either evolve or devolve depending on how you're currently playing, and then figure it out, right? Like,
yeah, taking a almost a 180 to this whole talk we've had about making niche decisions depending on your situation. What builds do you guys think were really strong previous patch and aren't as strong now, or weren't playable before, but suddenly they've made a resurgence with the most recent changes to the game?
I'm seeing more hippocampus now.
Oh yeah, I like ride. I'm gonna ride that seahorse all the way to the finish line. Love that card.
I have seen more monsters now than I have in the past, since like the guide that Kui has put out, and I've also seen a lot more people playing evil. And I'm not saying that's correlative. I'm just saying that it's just gotten more popular. If it is, great, fantastic. But I definitely see monsters being played a lot more. As I've noted before, I'm seeing less adventure on board, like at least throughout the mid game progression, seeing more XP spell being taken. I'm also, I see a lot of Fallen Angel. If there's not one in my lobby, I'm confused.
I think that people have caught on to the fact that oftentimes playing an adventurer on board, it makes you so much weaker that taking an XP spell and not having to sacrifice 2 board spots, or sometimes only 1 board spot, but often 2 board spots and gold, is oftentimes just less expensive and going to cost you less life. Yep. I've seen that for sure.
The major guideline that used to be see trash can, take trash can, was because it gave 3 HP way back, right? But now,
so like mitigated that loss in tempo.
Yeah, exactly. So, but now it's less relevant. So, and it's actually like making your board strong enough so your Wish Upon a Star actually procs, right? Because 2 XP, you're not getting 2 XP out of an adventure or any, like, you might if it's upgraded, right? Or if it slays, you have a ridiculously strong board in a Grimsoul. But then again, I've also had fights where it's hit like 4 times and I've gotten 4 XP in a round. So I can't really. Once again, your mileage 100% may vary there.
I'm very sad that nobody has talked about my main girl, Princess White. Dwarfs are good, and they always have.
Yes.
Stop.
I wanted to say that as one of the comps that's researched in this patch is I am seeing a lot more dwarves, and I'm seeing that the main component that people are building around is that tier 3 Princess White.
Yeah. I mean, it's for sure strong. Like, can't knock it. Like 100%.
I smashed quite a few lobbies with dwarves the other day.
I'm sure. I
regularly get my whites past 100 health, which is just absurd. Like
that's pretty insane. But I think my like dwarves being good, I think is like a change. Like is currently like the change in the meta. I still believe they're a trap, but if you can kill the lobby fast enough, anything works, right?
I don't think they're a trap. I think they hold the place that they were more so meant to.
Yeah,
now more than ever.
I think so.
Which is, I think, a really good thing.
Which is get a -5 MMR versus a
no, it's a strong mid game that has its weaknesses and a good player can transition to other things in the end game.
Right.
Sure, but sometimes you're full committed, right? Like,
and to be honest, yes, sometimes you'll end up in that third place spot, but I think I've closed out plenty of second and first with dwarves in this patch because, and what part of that is because with Roundtable moving to 7, the overall power level of the end game has come down so much that it's more of like a round robin of this build beats this build, this build beats this build, this build beats this build type of a situation where you see units that are high attack are going to decimate dwarves, but that same build that's high attack might lose to evil comp. But evil comp gets destroyed by dwarves. And so it's very interesting how each of the builds can kind of counter other builds. And they can all win.
Yeah, and we had this discussion, I think, in the first or second episode, where there's trifecta, and some people like trifectas. Even though this isn't a trifecta, this is like a hexfecta at this point, because one beats the other, beats the other, beats the other, beats the other, and it's all, not everybody's playing the same build, and not everybody's playing the same variation of the same build. I think that's super important.
I do think the one place doors suffer just in that sort of rock paper scissors type thing is they just have less flexibility as a comp, right? I mean, everybody knows that, but with evil and good, you have a bit more choice in terms of which units you run. You can run Soul Tack, you can run Doom Breath, you know what I mean. So I think that's one place doors suffer, but what they gain is the fact that they're so strong in the mid game that it raises your average placement if you play dwarfs, and then you figure it out after that.
Yeah, right. I'm so. I guess the whole thing is like my whole opinion about dwarves and the way. I mean, maybe I'm just doing it wrong, but get white on 3, end up finding a couple of dwarves, lose some fights along the way to somebody that high rolls, get pretty low in HP, and now I can't transition out, right? Because I have to make my board as strong as possible to be able to accommodate for the loss in HP that I have. So now I'm fully committing. Yeah, and now I'm fully committing. But I feel
like you brought up an interesting question though, which is if true that these builds are meant to potentially transition in some cases, what do those transitions look like? And what type of units are you looking for to transition into? One interesting build that I heard about I want to say today, which I thought was an interesting idea, is you turn your Princess White good with the Beauty's Influence, and now all you need to do is find a couple Ashwoods, and you can actually play Shoulder Fairies and Echo Woods with that, and you have giant units suddenly.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I've actually done that build before. It's very strong.
Yeah, and
there's also other things you can do as far as you could pick up 1 Cupid, sacrifice a dwarf for 1 Cupid, sacrifice 2 dwarves for Cupid and Medusa, and then all of a sudden you find an Ashwood and you can take off one more dwarf. The +2/+2 scaling off the 1 dwarf for your Princess White probably isn't that relevant, keeping a 10/10 dwarf, replacing it with a 20/20 Ashwood. Now you're open to Robin Wood. Now you have a high attack ranged unit you can put in your backline, and you can replace those things. But yeah, as you did mention earlier, sometimes you are in a position where you can't make these transitionary changes. But maybe, Bahamut, maybe what you're lacking is, I don't know because I don't see your games, but finding these small incremental changes earlier?
No, I can transition a board pretty well. I played enough TFT at least to know that I'm able to transition a board out of something into or nothing into something. I wouldn't say that I'm very good at that all of the time, but I am very good at being at least creative to be able to get from one spot to the other. What I'm primarily talking about is I'm too low in HP at the moment to be able to buy another unit without making my board stronger. And the only way that I could do that is by adding more dwarves. That's primarily what I'm talking about.
And you're pot committed at that point.
Yes, you're full committed when you're like sub 20 HP at like 5, right? Because now you have to actually invest in getting your board stronger. And the bait part, at least the part that I call bait, and this might not actually be bait, is that you end up like sometimes you end up just playing the high roll, the high rollers of the lobby, and you're not that person. So you end up getting, as a pummeled, and then you get pummeled again, and you get pummeled again. And then now you're in the spot where you have to fully commit, and you have to pray that you don't die.
I mean, you can be in that position running any comp, right?
Sure,
right.
But what I'm saying is
any comp.
Sure, but what I'm saying is the transition to be able to put other units in is a lot easier if you're playing any other comp, right?
I agree.
So
because the white is a bit of a commitment, especially through the mid game.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't mind committing to white. She's mine for life.
Why don't you marry her?
Oh, I plan to, Fleck. Don't you worry.
King.
Yeah. The other thing I want to just bring up for other people that are trying to play around white a bit more, and as Muhammad said, if you're at low life, you can't do this as easily. But Greenwood Knight is a really, really strong way to transition out of white out of dwarves. If you have a Greenwood Knight, a Princess White, and a Shoulder Fairies, right? Because now you've got a strong good unit, you've got a strong evil unit, and you've got your Shoulder Fairies. And once you kind of pick up that package, then you can start to kind of shave off the dwarfs out of your comp and eventually transition into like a tree comp, an evil comp, like whatever. But that is one avenue to kind of pivot if you see the opportunity. So,
yeah. I also would like to mention one of my pocket comps, or not pocket comps. One of the things I like to keep viable with dwarves is I lean into my 3 treasures a bit more than I do looking for Dwarven Forge, because Hat Ball is pretty insane. Pumping up some doublies, triplies, and greedies and whatnot is pretty good. You get the extra money or the extra stat lines on these doublies and triplies that you tend to be lacking sometimes in your front line playing dwarves, and could give you that little bit extra push. And then you could also use Hat Ball with a lot of good conversions in the end game as well.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And like I said, you can't put anything into a vacuum and call something good or bad. It's just incorrect to do so with this game. But I'm not like just playing the meme. Oh, dwarf bad. It's like no, dwarf okay sometime, depending. The same way that fairy godmother's okay sometime.
Yeah, I think that dwarf is the right answer more often than it was the previous patch.
I 100% agree with you there. Like I can't even
and that's healthy for the game. I think the current patch is the best state that the game has ever been in.
So I agree. It's reverted with one treasure change. That was slightly a burn, but
not completely, because it's like the Arthur change as well as the Heartwood Elder being added in. There were some other things that
Princess
they did too.
Oh. Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of changes that are quite relevant that make this current patch feel really good. Yeah, and like I know you were joking. It does feel similar to 2 patches ago, but this is the best and cleanest it's been.
Also, things just changed. The meta shift. Like what I love, I think is so cool about this game is you see meta shifts with no change to the game whatsoever. Right? Yep. There was the MMR reset, and all of a sudden, everybody was just power leveling like crazy out of the blue. Now we've had this tempo meta with Arthur, and all of a sudden there's been no real changes to the game in terms of 2 patches ago, but there's a lot less power leveling now. Yep. Like I just think that all those self-correcting changes, in addition to every other thing, has led to a meta that I am personally not great at yet, but I'm really excited to try to figure it out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, me too.
Same.
And what you said that it's reverted by one treasure change, and I know you said it jokingly. But that's the cool thing about dynamic games like this, where all of the pieces have a relation to each other, is that sometimes one piece is the key. You just shift one piece slightly and it changes the entire landscape. And that's what's cool about auto battlers, is like that you have all these builds that they work with each other in very specific ways on very specific turns, and this build is beating this build on this turn on tier 4. and this build is stronger than this build on this particular turn, and they spike at different times. And then your end game ends up different because of it, because of where everyone's health total was at. Like, let's say if they put a really powerful unit that becomes completely useless later on in the game on like tier 2, your games now are like 3 turns shorter because 2 or 3 people died. Like, for example, Gilded Harp. The way that Gilded Harp affected the game made the games a lot shorter, and it changed the way the game played, and it changed the way that the end games played out because of that. Sometimes it really is like one piece gets moved and everything else shifts around it, and it's like you're playing a different game, that's like the coolest thing about auto battlers to me.
Yeah, I agree. I want to go ahead and say thank you, Shwei. Do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up here?
Just telling people that you should try to look at why something is a good decision or not. And I think Sir Salty does a great job at this in his coaching. I'll just give him a little shout out. I've seen him do it. Is he doesn't tell people what to do. He asks them why. And ask yourself a lot more often, why does this make sense? Why is this a good decision? And I think you'll start playing a lot better in the long run. I think you'll lose a bunch of MMR, but I think you'll get better in the long run. So keep doing that. Take more of a method-based approach. I think you guys will see great results. And thank you guys for having me on. It was super fun.
Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. So, just to go ahead and wrap up here, friends, I would like you to go and implore you, incentivize you to go ahead and reach out in the comments and tell us what you think about this current patch, the current meta shifts, and any comments that you have on this current YouTube episode, rather. The best comment that will be rated by Keith, Kleck, and myself will essentially get 4,000 dust as a giveaway. This is from Good Luck Games. This is essentially given by them. So this
sponsored.
is hashtag sponsor, hashtag ads. And we would just like to go ahead and help y'all out, get some new heroes, maybe try out some of the new things. And so like, comment, subscribe, and Keith, what don't we buy?
Don't buy Humpty ever, never.
Thanks. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.